Hey guys, tonight we crawl beneath the smoky roof of a Mongolian yurt, where steam curls from boiling milk, wool creaks under your weight, and the wind drums a lullaby against the felt-covered walls. You're lying on layers of thick, earthy matting, damp in spots, scratchy in others, and your nose is full of sheep. Not the idea of sheep. Literal sheep. Their wool. Their sweat. Their, let's say, essence. This is where the story begins, not in a gilded palace or a gleaming lab, but here, in a place where life and shelter were always just a few sheep away. The wind outside is loud. And cold. Like, freeze your eyebrows off. Cold. The kind that makes you rethink everything, including why you ever complained about your apartment thermostat being broken. Out here, comfort came not from central heating, but from centuries of improvisation, and felt, glorious, smelly, transformative felt, was at the heart of it all. You probably won't survive this life, to be honest. Not without a couple of yaks, a coal stove, and a tolerance for fermented mare's milk. But don't worry. You don't need to survive, you just need to imagine. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where are you listening from? And what time is it there? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the Central Asian steppe, wind slicing your cheeks like paper. Around you, the landscape is flat, endless, and humming with silence. It's the kind of silence that stretches time, making minutes feel like days, perfect for falling asleep to, terrible for surviving in. Here, the air is dry and hungry. And yet, against this harshness, humans not only survived, they got cozy. Felt was how. Mongolian felt making begins not as art, or even craft, but as survival. The earliest nomads of the Eurasian steppe needed shelter, warmth, and something durable enough to wrap their entire lives in. You can't just throw up a log cabin here. Trees are shy in these parts. So they turned to their best friend / livestock / textile supplier, the sheep. Wool was everywhere, and everywhere it blew. You'd walk a few kilometers and come back looking like a lint roller. The Mongols quickly realized that if you beat wool hard enough, wet it, roll it, stomp on it, and cuss at it lovingly, it would compress into a dense, matted sheet. No sewing required. No fancy tools. Just time, pressure, and foot sweat. Historians still argue whether the process was discovered accidentally. Maybe someone slept on a pile of fleece and woke up stuck to it. Or whether it was observed from the way animals' coats naturally mat in the rain. Either way, someone decided to go all in on the "what if wool but armor" idea. The earliest felt pieces date back to the Bronze Age, and archaeological finds from burial sites in the Altai Mountains have turned up fragments that are over 2,000 years old. Imagine that, 2 millennia later, and it's still recognizably felt. Still thick. Still clinging to its shape like an old man to his routine. And here's something quirky. Early felt pieces weren't just practical. Some were dyed and patterned, featuring mythical beasts and geometric borders. A fragment found in a Pazyryk burial mound shows a stylized ibex prancing like it's auditioning for a goat-themed Broadway show. Turns out, felt had fashion potential, too. In Mongolia, the felt was used to cover jars, round, collapsible homes with wooden frames and layers of felt insulation. You'll hear the term yurt elsewhere, but here it's gur, pronounced like gear, with a soft growl. These homes are genius in their simplicity. Light enough to be packed onto camels. Warm enough to laugh at Siberian winds. They breathe in summer and hug heat in winter. Basically, they're the hoodie of ancient architecture. Making felt, though? Not exactly a spa day. First, you shear the sheep, an exercise in patience, wrestling, and humility. Then, you clean the wool. Or, well, sort of. Sometimes, clean just means most of the poop is gone. The wool gets carted, fluffed up into soft piles, then laid out in thick layers, wetted with warm water, and rolled up around a pole. And here's the real kicker: to get it felted, you have to apply serious pressure. Some nomads used stones. Some used their own feet. But the real MVP? Horses. You tie up the roll, drag it behind a galloping horse, and boom, felt. It's like a medieval spin cycle, only with hooves and yelling. Now imagine the sound: hooves pounding, wool squishing, women chanting rhythmic work songs. Kids trying to sneak off with tufts of fleece to make sock puppets. Old men pretending not to supervise while giving constant opinions. It's loud, it's messy, and it smells like wet animal. But this is where warmth begins. The felt dries under the sun or near a fire, thickening into mats that repel water, block wind, and muffle noise. You lie back on one now, tracing the faint ghost of hoofprints with your fingers. Somewhere in the fibers, a bit of ancient dust twitches free. It's not glamorous, but it's ingenious. And while it might look like a single sheet, it's actually the condensed story of a whole household, of sheep raised and fed, wool worked and sung over, weather watched and waited out. To this day, Mongolian herders call it buzizhir, a term that connotes not just the material, but the process and care behind it. You don't just have felt. You raise it. Like bread. Or children. Of course, there are debates. Historians still argue whether felting was first developed in Central Asia or introduced through contact with other ancient cultures like the Scythians or the Persians. Some even think the process might have spread westward along early trade routes, like a woolly whisper on the wind. But here, in the heart of Mongolia, felt is no borrowed idea. It's as native as the sky, as faithful as a horse. And right now, as you pull that imaginary felt blanket a little tighter around your shoulders, it starts to make sense why something so simple could last so long. You wake up, or dream that you do, to the rhythmic pounding of hooves just outside the GR. The morning wind has that dry crisp smell of dust and horsehair, and your blanket, yep, still felt, sticks slightly to your skin from yesterday's leftover sweat and lanolin. In the soft light filtering through the smoke hole, you can just make out the silhouettes of two herders dragging a rolled-up fleece bundle toward the corral. It's felt-making day. Out here on the steppe, felt isn't made in workshops. It's made in movement, motion, mess. You step outside barefoot, toes curling against the dew-stiff grass, and instantly regret not grabbing your boots. The herders nod at you, curious but amused. Another wide-eyed traveler trying to understand how a bunch of wool becomes a floor. This morning, they're making a sherdeg, a felt carpet used to cover the ger's floor. And not just for coziness. In a ger, floors matter. They're symbolic. The hearth is sacred, the door always faces south, and everything has a designated spot. The felt floor isn't just where you sit, sleep, and spill soup, it's where generations imprint themselves. Literally. Today's process starts with a layout. Women and older girls gather in a half circle, unrolling cleaned, carded wool into wide, fluffy sheets. Layer by layer, the fleece is stacked like lasagna, alternating directions for strength. You help pat it into place, your hands sinking wrist deep into the pillowy mass. It's surprisingly warm. And there's that same old smell again, like wet barn and smoky tea. Once the layers are set, they're sprinkled with warm, soapy water. Not detergent, just soap made from animal fat and ash. It smells like a campfire's ghost. Then comes the rolling. The whole bundle gets wrapped around a wooden pole or leather rod, tied off at the ends, and hauled toward a waiting pony. You blink. Yep. They're really going to drag it. The horse, blissfully unaware it's now a textile machine, starts walking in wide circles. The bundle bumps and wobbles behind it like a wool burrito. As the minutes stretch, the friction does its magic. Fibers hook into each other. Heat and moisture bond them. Layers merge. Historians still argue whether the horse-dragging method predates the hand-rolling one, or if they developed side by side depending on region and season. But either way, you can't deny the poetry, a nomadic solution powered by the very animals that shaped this mobile world. Felting, here, is a communal act. There are no solo artisans dramatically sighing over their looms. Everyone joins in. Children jump onto the wool roll during breaks, giggling as they're dragged a few feet. Elders supervise from the shady side of the ger, sipping salty milk tea and offering commentary that is technically helpful but mostly critical. And while it's tempting to call this craftsmanship, it's more than that. It's rhythm. It's ritual. One woman starts singing a song about her grandmother's prized shirt egg, and soon others hum along. The tune lilts in and out of key, like wind through reeds. The beat matches the hoof falls. You find yourself swaying without meaning to. Then, the roll is unwrapped. Everyone leans in. The felt has shrunk by almost half, thickened into a dense, solid mat. The edges are ragged but soft. You brush your fingers over the surface. It's damp, tough, almost springy. Like a sponge wearing armor. Steam curls up where the morning sun kisses the surface. Now comes the artistic bit. If the felt's going to be decorated, it happens now while it's still pliable. Using colored wool, sometimes dyed with onion skins, plant roots, or even crushed beetles, they press in patterns, diamonds, horns, flowers, sun wheels. No rulers. No stencils. Just memory and muscle. Some families have been using the same motifs for generations. A fringe tidbit for you: in some regions, women used to weave locks of their own hair into the designs. Not for fashion, but as a quiet blessing. A way to say, "This home remembers me." And okay, also a low-key brag if you had particularly nice hair. As the carpet dries, it stiffens. It'll be used immediately, laid on the garth floor with heavy stones on the corners. Over time, foot traffic will smooth it. The center will wear thin first, just where the family gathers around the fire. Little burn holes might appear. Spilled broth will darken one corner. But the felt holds. That's its job. You sit back now, watching the mat flatten under its own weight. Behind you, a goat tries to eat your sleeve. You politely push it away. A toddler claps at the goat. The goat climbs onto a saddle. Nobody seems to care. And that's the thing. Felt making isn't just about making a thing. It's a season. A moment in the cycle of nomadic life. A time when the community slows down enough to stomp on wool and laugh about it. Like canning tomatoes or chopping wood, it's boring in the best possible way. Predictable. Rooted. Historians still argue whether this communal approach evolved out of necessity or spiritual belief, whether the group labor was just efficient, or a reflection of steppe cosmology, where everything is circular and interwoven. Sky, earth, animals, people, each plays a role. Each gets a thread. As the afternoon wanes, and the last mat is pressed and set, someone boils fresh milk. The women rub their backs, the kids fall asleep against saddlebags, and the horses nibble weeds by the stream. You close your eyes for just a second. The sun warms your face. The felt beneath you is still soft and slightly damp, but comforting. And somewhere in the background, a goat has climbed onto the roof of the GR. Again. You're jostling now, not from a bumpy dream, but because your entire house is moving. Literally. The gur you're curled up in is halfway across a dusty valley, lashed to a wooden cart pulled by oxen. Welcome to 13th century Mongolia, where homes ride like ships across land and empires are stitched together with felt. You peek through a flap and blink at the blur of hooves, dust, and horsehair streaming past. The horizon rolls endlessly on. Above, the sky is that same impossible blue. Around you, family, tools, firewood, and yes, more felt. Mountains of it, tied down with leather thongs, billowing slightly in the wind. If a storm blew in, you could rebuild your house in an hour. If a war broke out, you could flee with everything but the goats. Because this isn't just any era. This is the time of Genghis Khan. You're now one tiny passenger in the fastest moving society the world has ever known. Felt making didn't just keep people warm, it helped build the largest contiguous land empire in human history. The Mongol conquests weren't powered by steel or siege engines alone, they were fueled by mobility. And felt was the miracle material that made this lifestyle possible. Everything was felted, not just floors and roofs, but saddlebags, clothing, bedding, horse armor, even prayer flags. You imagine Mongol warriors tearing across the plains with felt-wrapped weapons, their jars folding neatly onto carts at every stop. There's something deeply satisfying about how low-tech, high-function this whole system is. IKEA wishes. The army moved as families. And those families needed homes, warmth, privacy, and the ability to disappear overnight. A felt-covered gur could be erected in less than an hour and disassembled even faster. It was windproof, waterproof, breathable, and, this part's underrated, really good at muffling sound. Private councils. Quiet rest. Midnight snacks? All possible. And let's not skip over the felted saddles. These weren't your dainty equestrian affairs. They were thick, high-bowed, and armored with layers of felt to keep warriors steady while galloping and shooting arrows behind their backs. You try it now, mentally, and realize your lower back already hurts. Historians still argue whether felted saddle blankets offered a real tactical advantage or if they were just a smart use of excess wool. But either way, they worked. Mongol horses could travel 60 to 100 kilometers a day, swapping riders and resting in shifts, all without losing gear to rain or chafing. And yes, there was even felt insulation between the horse and the saddle, because a cold horse is a slow horse. But here's where it gets deliciously quirky. Archaeological finds have turned up felt masks, yes, masks, that Mongol riders would wear into battle or on long journeys. Some were purely protective, some ceremonial. One had stylized ram horns sewn in. Scholars believe they might have been used to intimidate enemies or invite the favor of steppe spirits. You picture a stampede of horned riders, faces obscured by woolly visors, and shiver. Not from cold. From awe. At the same time, felt became a symbol of Mongol culture to the rest of the world. Chinese chroniclers described the portable palaces of the Khans, giant, richly decorated jars with felt so thick and bright it gleamed like lacquer. Persian visitors to the court of Monk Khan wrote about felt wall panels embroidered with gold thread, with felt curtains so heavy they took 4 men to lift. These elite jars weren't just homes. They were mobile thrones. Felt, in these cases, wasn't rustic, it was regal. Imagine a structure made entirely of thick, white felt, with dyed borders in reds and indigos, surrounded by silk banners flapping in the wind. Inside, felt cushions, felt partitions, felt canopies. Like living inside a giant wool cake. You lie back and picture the great Khan himself, Genghis, or his grandson Kublai, sitting cross-legged inside one of these plush palaces. Maps spread out before him. Tea steaming from a felt-wrapped kettle. Outside, the world waits. Inside, he plots its conquest. And in every direction, felt. Of course, the material wasn't always so glamorous. For the average soldier or herder, felt meant insulation. Boot liners. Horse blankets. Windbreakers. Even field dressings. It's water-resistant, flame-retardant, and thanks to its fibrous density, surprisingly good at stopping arrows. Don't test this at home. Or at all. Some Mongol armies even experimented with felt armor. Picture layers of felt stacked together, stiffened with glue or rawhide, then worn beneath or instead of metal. It wasn't as flashy as chainmail, but it was quiet, warm, and cheap. And you didn't jingle when you moved. Imagine sneaking up on someone wearing wool pajamas and still being terrifying. Felt also played a ceremonial role in the military. Before major campaigns, troops gathered in felt-covered tents to swear loyalty and plan attacks. Victory rituals might involve burning or cutting felt strips as offerings to the sky gods. There's even a weird old account of warriors burying fragments of torn felt to trap the bad spirits of fallen enemies. You know. Just in case. And this all brings us back to motion. The Mongols didn't conquer the known world by setting up cozy villas and planting vineyards. They brought their homes with them. Their lives, family, worship, rest, traveled on wheels, wrapped in wool, pulled by yak and horse and faith. Felt didn't just enable their empire. It was the empire, layered and overlapping and shockingly durable. As your imaginary journey with the caravan ends, your gur is being unpacked again. In the distance, smoke curls up from dozens of other felted homes. Warriors wash their hands. Children chase goats. Somewhere nearby, a singer is chanting an old poem about a blanket that walked across the world. And under your fingertips, felt. Still warm. Still holding. You're back inside the gur now, lying belly down on a thick, quilted felt mat, running your fingers over the seams where one patch ends and another begins. The scent is the same, lanolin and earth, with maybe a hint of the mutton stew someone reheated for lunch. It's cozy. But more than that, it's round. Not just the mat. The whole house. You look up, and everything curves, walls, roof, shadows, even the smoke swirling upward. There's a reason for that. In Mongolia, the gur isn't just shaped this way because circles are cute. This round, symmetrical design, covered entirely in layers of felt, was born of deep practicality, but also philosophy. It's a worldview in wool. A circle has no weak corners, which matters when the wind is trying to evict your entire home. It also radiates warmth evenly, holds tension better, and importantly, makes the space feel centered. No side feels more important than another. Except, of course, the southern entrance. Always south. Always. Step over the threshold, never step on it, and everything has its place. The left side is for men, tools, and gear. The right side is for women, kitchen supplies, and sometimes cradles. In the back, the north side, sits the altar or honored guests. And in the center, under the roof hole where smoke escapes and stars sometimes peek through, burns the fire. The heart of it all. Felt is more than wallpaper here. It defines the space. It absorbs echoes. It insulates against the screeching cold. It's layered thickest on the roof, where rain and snow gather their strength. You've got an inner felt wall, often white or off-white, for cleanliness and reflection. Then outer layers for weather. Then decorative layers, red, green, gold, embellished with stylized sun rays, ram's horns, or endless knots. Historians still argue whether the Guer's circular plan was inspired by celestial beliefs or developed strictly through generations of adaptation. But let's be honest, when a structure works this well, it's probably a bit of both. Mongolians didn't just live in these domes. They believed in them. There's even a belief that the round shape mimics the sky itself. Eternal blue heaven, the sacred dome above, finds its echo in the domed roof of the GR. So when you lie beneath that roof, you're not just inside a shelter. You're in communion with the cosmos. No pressure, though. Just don't snore too loudly. You never know who's listening. Another fringe tidbit for you: some families would place a small felt disc near the roof opening, stitched with protective patterns, to act as a spiritual lid when no fire was burning. Not to block smoke, but to block spirits. Apparently, even mischievous steppe spirits respect a good stitch. Everything inside is felted. Floor mats, wall hangings, bed rolls, even insulation wrapped around support columns, sometimes adorned with symbolic patterns passed down for generations. You begin to notice that no two pieces of felt are the same. Some are thick as mattresses. Some are thin as a sandwich wrap. Some are scratchy, others smooth, depending on the quality of the wool and how fiercely it was stomped. And yes, stomped. Remember the hooves and dragging from earlier? That happens outside. But inside, the felts evolve. They get softer from years of use, take on the smells of tea, fire, life. Some even gain a kind of house spirit, vibe, objects that feel watchful. Not in a creepy way. In a grandma knows you skipped washing your hands way. You move to the wall hangings now. Known as tusky eyes, these often hang just below the roofline. They aren't just for beauty. They help with insulation, yes, but also storytelling. You squint at one with embroidered goats and spirals. Another with two suns. You ask what it means, and the elder in the corner smiles like you've just asked where babies come from. Everything, she says. It means everything. Colors matter too. Red is luck. Green is peace. Yellow represents harmony with nature. Blue, the sky. Some jars are monochrome. Others are riots of color. But all are layered with meaning, history, family. Even grief. A faded patch might mark a loss. A new patch, a birth. And as you sit there, legs crossed on that ancient felt mat, you start to feel it, the quiet embrace of the GR. It doesn't echo. It doesn't chill. It holds you, sound and warmth bouncing inward. It's like living inside a hug. There's a popular saying out here: better a small felt house full of laughter than a palace filled with sorrow. And you get it now. The felt doesn't just shield from cold, it softens the whole world. You imagine life in a hard-edged hut in the mountains. Sounds bounce. Cold slips through. Nothing feels safe. But here, every surface cushions. Every edge bends. Even time feels slower. Historians still argue whether this emotional connection to space shaped Mongol diplomacy. After all, many negotiations happened inside felted jairs, not stone palaces. Was the round room meant to equalize power? To disarm tension? Maybe. Or maybe it's just easier to say, yes, when your chair is this warm. You lie down again. The felt beneath you has warmed to your body. You can feel the tiny hills and ridges where years of footsteps have pressed it smooth. A toddler stomps by and flops down beside you. They hand you a strip of dried curd, giggle, then run off. The felt muffles even their tiny thunder. Outside, the wind picks up, but in here, it's all wool and fire and breath. You close your eyes. The roof curves above you, like a sky you can reach up and touch. Everything circles. Everything connects. You're not just lying on felt anymore. You're lying on memory, intention, comfort. And somewhere out there, the empire still turns, quietly, inside another woolen dome. You wake with a tickle in your nose. Not dust this time, though there's always a bit of that, but something softer. Finer. Floating. You sit up slowly and watch the air dance with tiny curls of wool, twisting like snowflakes. Across the gur, a woman is carding fleece, long strokes with a wooden comb, coaxing order from fluff. You're in the company of wool whisperers now. She glances up, gives you a half smile, then returns to her rhythm. Her hands move without hesitation, sorting the strands by length and texture. This is the real start of felt making, knowing your wool like you know your own skin. Out here, sheep aren't just livestock, they're weather reports, mood boards, and generational legacies wrapped in a wool coat. You step outside into the early light, where several more women squat around a growing pile of fleece. The sheep they've sheared wander nearby, looking vaguely embarrassed. You crouch beside one of the women, an elder with sun-cracked skin and wool-threaded sleeves, and she offers you a handful of raw fleece. Feel it, she says. You do. It's greasy, springy, full of twigs, and somehow still comforting. She pinches a lock between her fingers and gives it a sharp tug. This, she says, is good wool. This sheep had a calm winter. You raise an eyebrow. Apparently, sheep moods make felt better or worse. Quirky? Maybe. But these women have spent a lifetime reading the language of wool. A stressed sheep? Coarse fiber. Too much wind? Brittle ends. Ate too much wild onion? Your felt might smell like soup for a year. Historians still argue whether these interpretations were purely empirical or laced with animistic beliefs. Was it observation or spirit reading? Maybe both. Either way, you quickly learn that in Mongolian felt making, wool is never just material. It's a message. You follow the wool through its journey. First, the cleaning, a long, meditative rinse in lukewarm water, sometimes steeped with herbs or even fermented mare's milk to soften stubborn grime. There's no factory here. Just buckets, patience, and the kind of conversation that loops and loops like yarn, gossip, old songs, remembered dreams. A fringe detail: some families hang strands of wool outside during a full moon, believing it will charge the fibers with protective energy. A sort of lunar laundering, if you will. It's part ritual, part folklore, and 100% delightful. Back inside, the wool is spread to dry, combed again, then inspected by someone with better eyesight than yours. They're looking for the right crimp, those tiny zigzags in each strand that help the fibers cling together during felting. The best wool crimps like a spring. The worst? Like spaghetti left out overnight. You're handed a pair of wooden carders, flat paddles with teeth, and you try to mimic the smooth back-and-forth brushing motion. Your wrists complain almost immediately. The woman beside you laughs. Soft hands, she says. City hands? You nod sheepishly. pun intended. Once carded, the wool is fluffed into layers, ready to be felted. But this group pauses for tea, passing around a steaming bowl of sooty sai, salty milk tea brewed with black leaves and yak butter. You sip. It's challenging. Like drinking a warm ocean. But the warmth seeps through your belly to your fingertips. And the laughter around you makes it taste almost like comfort. As the tea break ends, someone throws a pinch of dried juniper into the fire. Smoke curls upward, sharp and clean, brushing the ceiling. You realize this isn't just air freshener, it's a blessing. A warding off. A way of saying, let this work go well. You ask about bad wool days, and the elder leans closer. Her voice drops to a whisper. Once we used fleece from a sick ram, she says. The felt tore itself apart. She taps her temple. Not all wool wants to become home. You blink. The others nod solemnly. It's not just superstition. Wool has moods. Felt has will. This isn't factory production, it's negotiation. Between human and animal. Between hand and fiber. Between present and past. And if you listen closely, they say, you can hear the wool respond. That night, you watch them begin a new piece, a small felt square for an infant's bed. The wool is laid out gently, wetted, and rolled, but this time with singing. A lullaby. Not for the baby, for the wool. To coax it into kindness. The tune is simple, circular, and somehow impossibly ancient. It loops softly, then fades. One woman whispers the final line like a spell. Stay warm, stay whole, stay here. You trace the edges of a completed piece, marveling at the texture, soft yet strong, like skin over muscle. It smells like smoke and sheep and something deeper. The kind of smell that says you're safe. Historians still argue whether these songs had structural benefits, timing work, regulating effort, or whether they were purely emotional, ritualistic. But whatever the reason, they continue. Passed from mother to daughter, and to niece, sung not on stages but over steaming pots and wool rolls. The felting ends with another layer of drying, another hour of tending. The felt square, destined for a cradle, is now warm to the touch, pulsing slightly from its time in hands and song. You press your cheek against it. It holds. And in the flickering light of the gur, you start to see the truth. Felt isn't made so much as invited. With wool, yes. But also time. And trust. You're on the move again. Only this time, it's not just across open plains. It's across lines. Borders. Cultures. The soft, rolling hills of Mongolia blur into the dense pine forests of southern Siberia, then slips south into the dry, sharp crags of Xinjiang. You're still on the trail of felt, but the voices are changing, and the stories have begun to braid into something bigger. Felt making never stopped at Mongolia's edge. It seeped outward, tucked into saddlebags, sewn into boots, traded in rolls, and passed from neighbor to neighbor, tribe to tribe. In this moment, you're sitting beside a Kazakh grandmother in western Mongolia, watching her fingers move with the same confidence as the herders you met weeks ago. But the pattern she's stitching into her felt, bold diamonds and jagged lightning bolts, are just a little different. Sharper. Louder. You ask her why. She shrugs, smiles, and says, because we are not quiet people. Her felt is both a blanket and a signature. And it turns out, this is true nearly everywhere the steppe touches. Each culture has its own variation, of process, of style, of belief, but the foundation remains startlingly similar: wool, water, pressure, patience. In southern Siberia, you spend a few days with a Tuvan family, whose yurt smells strongly of smoked cheese and cedar. Their felt is heavier, thicker, almost aggressive. The walls of their homes are triple-layered, with the innermost sheet dyed a deep blue-black meant to absorb heat and possibly bad dreams. They tell you that felt eats the cold if you feed it well with prayers and firewood. You lean into the warmth of their gur and trace a stitched motif of a reindeer spiraling into a thundercloud. You ask what it means. They say it's not meant to be understood, just respected. Historians still argue whether these symbols across the steppes evolved from one common proto-steppe culture or whether they emerged independently in parallel, like multiple echoes in a canyon. The truth is probably a tangle of both. What's clear, though, is that felt served as both passport and page, carrying style, belief, and practicality wherever it went. A quirk you come across in western Xinjiang, in some Uyghur communities, felt was traditionally used not just in homes, but in burials. Infants might be wrapped in felt and buried under date palms, the wool believed to comfort the child into the next life. One elderly weaver tells you, "Wool remembers warmth, even underground." In the Tian Shan foothills, you encounter Kyrgyz herders who felt in a way that feels more like dance than labor. They use huge foot-stomping mats, where a group, usually women, tramp the wool in unison to a rhythm clapped out by a child with a wooden spoon. You join in, cautiously, and after just 10 minutes your thighs are burning. The women laugh and barely break a sweat. Their felts are bold in color, deep reds and purples, and cut into large appliques known as sherdaks, then sewn into decorative pieces layered atop plainer white mats. These aren't just functional. They're festive. They travel to weddings, dowries, summer pastures. One particularly intricate sherdak you admire took 3 years to complete. 3 years. It's the size of your mattress and weighs nearly as much. The colors are natural dyes, walnut hulls, madder root, dried pomegranate. Sometimes even boiled tobacco. Each family has its own recipes. And each pattern speaks about lineage, about blessing, about the animals they raise and the rivers they cross. And yet, the technique itself hasn't changed much. From northern Mongolia to Uzbekistan, you see the same essential tools: hands, feet, water, and an impressive tolerance for discomfort. It's like a shared language spoken in texture. Of course, felt wasn't just domestic. In many of these cultures, it was public, ceremonial, and even sacred. In parts of western Mongolia, where Kazakh eagle hunters live, you notice that the birds' hoods and perches are lined with fine felt. Not just for comfort, though it helps, but for tradition. There's an unspoken rule that if you train an eagle, you respect it enough to give it proper materials. Felt is a sign of care, of reverence. Meanwhile, in certain remote parts of the Altai, you come across a family who has kept a felt effigy of an ancestor, tucked into a wall crevice. It's just a little doll-shaped bundle, gray, soft, anonymous, but it gets dusted every week and offered to every Tsagan Sar, Lunar New Year. She listens, they say. Wool listens. That's the fringe bit that sticks with you today. Not the colors. Not the patterns. But this idea that felt holds memory. That the same piece of mat you trampled as a child, or cried into when you lost someone, will keep whispering that moment back to the next person who lays on it. You lie on your back in one of these crossover chairs, a hybrid style that mixes Mongolian layout with Tuvan ornament and Kyrgyz cushions, and you feel the overlap. Not just of cultures, of centuries. You begin to notice the quiet dialogues happening between traditions. How a border doesn't stop a craft, it just colors it differently. Historians still argue whether these trans-regional felting practices emerged from migration or trade. Did the wool move with people, or did people adapt the wool they found? Either way, it's clear that wherever grass grows and sheep roam, felt follows. And so do you. Across valleys. Over invisible borders. Past history still whispered in the creases of an old mat. As the night deepens, the gur dims to a dull orange glow from the last embers in the hearth. You roll over, tucking a rolled-up sherdak beneath your head. It smells of smoke, time, and travel. Not one home. Many. It's still dark when you wake, the kind of pre-dawn dark that feels thick and old. There's a strange quiet pressing down on the gur. No goat bleats, no fire crackle, just the steady rhythm of breath and the soft creaking of wool walls tightening in the cold. You blink, shift, and hear something you hadn't noticed before, a gentle thud-thud from outside. Ritual time. You pull on your boots and step into the frigid air, where a few bundled figures stand around a low table draped in white felt. One woman is burning dried herbs. Another is drizzling a line of milk along the eastern edge of the mat. You squint, and someone hands you a hot stone to hold. It smells faintly of scorched mutton and cedar smoke. This is not felt making. This is felt blessing. Turns out, felt has moods and superstitions to match. The Mongolian steppe may be a place of practical survival, but it's also thick with belief. And if you're going to make something that shelters your whole life, you better make sure you're on good terms with the spirits. Today, they're making a new felt wall piece, and tradition says it can't be started without proper ritual. You watch as the woman sprinkles mare's milk in 4 directions, muttering a prayer under her breath. East for the sun. West for the ancestors. North for strength. South for good fortune. Then, finally, she dabs a bit on the center of the wool itself. So it won't rebel. Someone whispers beside you. Historians still argue whether these rituals were adapted from older shamanic traditions or developed as felt took on spiritual symbolism over centuries. What's not debated is how seriously these gestures are taken. Some families won't use felt made without blessing, believing it can carry illness, misfortune, or even wrong dreams. And yes, wrong dreams are a whole category here. One elderly herder tells you about a cousin who made a saddle blanket without singing over it first. His horse stopped listening, she says solemnly. Then it kicked him. Then it disappeared. You're not sure how metaphorical that last part is. But you nod politely and sip your salty tea. A fringe custom. When someone dies in the winter and burial must be delayed, they're often wrapped in a special sheet of white felt and stored in an honored part of the gur until the ground thaws. This felt becomes sacred, never reused, never touched carelessly. Some say it holds a sliver of the soul. Others say it listens at night. The idea that felt can trap things, dreams, spirits, emotions, shows up in other places too. You've heard of gur fires going out mysteriously after using unblessed felt. Or of mats that always feel cold, no matter how close they are to the hearth. One woman shows you a piece she swears, shrieks, softly during storms. She keeps it rolled up with a strip of red thread and only brings it out during Tsaga Ansar. Still, superstition doesn't mean fear. More often, it means reverence. These beliefs shape behavior, when to make felt, who should start the first roll, what days are auspicious for laying the roof sheet. You learn that felting during a new moon is bad luck. The wool won't hold, someone says. And never whistle while felting. Spirits hate that. As the day brightens, you join in the work, unrolling clean fleece, sprinkling warm water, then helping to roll it tightly. The chanting starts again, soft and slow, almost like a heartbeat. But this time, there's a second layer of sound, a kind of humming or throat singing weaving beneath the words. You glance over, and one of the men is singing low into the wool itself. Let it hear, he says between notes. You help drag the roll behind a small pony, the hooves kicking up tiny clouds of dust as you make wide laps around the drying grass. Every so often, someone stops and burns a sliver of dried sheep dung, a surprisingly sacred fuel. It's not just about heat, they explain. It's about continuity. The sheep gives wool warmth, fuel. You honor that cycle. Felt made this way is said to be alive. Not literally, though no one says that out loud, but vibrationally. It holds intention. Maybe even memory. Families often keep a strip of their very first felt mat in a hidden pouch, passed down like a relic. Some hang them near doorways. Others bury them under threshold stones. Historians still argue whether these traditions emerged purely from practicality, ritual as reinforcement of process, or from a deeper animist worldview, where everything is alive and responsive. But when you press your hand into a freshly finished mat, still warm from sun and friction, you begin to understand why people listen so carefully. As dusk creeps in, the newly blessed felt piece is hung in the north wall of the GR. It's simple, cream-colored with a border of red and green, stitched in repeating spirals that mimic the wind. The woman who led the ritual steps back, wipes her hands on her apron, and says, "Now the house can sleep." You lie down again, this time directly under the new panel. The felt above you creaks faintly as the wind outside picks up. But inside, all is still. Settled. You feel the wool pressing back slightly, firm, forgiving, familiar. And as you drift off, one last superstition curls around your mind like smoke, that a blessed felt wall keeps nightmares out, and sometimes keeps good dreams in. It's morning again, and you're squinting at the sky through a film of mist. Not quite rain. Not quite fog. Just enough dampness to make everything soggy, including your boots, your mood, and, most importantly, the wool. Today, you learn how the Mongols made their felt water-resistant, and why, in some circles, goats were once considered personally responsible for leaky roofs. You're huddled beside a felting team under a canvas tarp, watching them work the wool with grim determination. There's no sunshine to help dry it, so they're improvising, alternating between hand-pressing and occasional bursts of singing. The felt needs to seal. It needs to resist. And that doesn't happen on its own. You'd think wool, being wool, would naturally repel water. But that's only partially true. Fresh fleece is full of lanolin, the waxy substance secreted by sheep that gives wool its smell, its slight sheen, and its famously sticky, water-repellent character. The trouble is, lanolin comes bundled with a lot of gunk, sweat, dirt, twigs, and, well, less pleasant sheep products. So the felters must walk a careful line, clean enough to felt properly, but not so clean that the wool loses its water-resistant properties. Too much washing, and your mat becomes a sponge. Too little, and your mat becomes a smelly sponge. This is where goat lore comes in. According to an old superstition whispered mostly by older herders, goats have a tendency to curse wool. Not on purpose. Just by being around. Their hair is coarser, slicker, and less absorbent than sheep's. And if goat fibers accidentally mix with the fleece, say, during shearing or storage, it can mess with the felting process. You've now officially entered the realm of fiber politics. One felter tells you with a wink, "If your roof leaks, find the goat who looked at it funny." You're pretty sure she's joking. Mostly. Historians still argue whether this goat-blaming tradition was a symbolic way to explain flawed technique, or if it reflects an actual aversion to cross-contamination of fibers in early nomadic wool practices. What's certain is that any household serious about their felt keeps goat and sheep fleece far apart. A woolly segregation, if you will. You move inside a gur under construction, walls are up, roofs halfway covered, and step cautiously onto the main roof sheet, now drying over the wooden lattice. It's thick. Maybe 6 or 7 layers. The outermost layer is a deep gray-black, speckled with pale lines where it's been patched with older felt. This isn't decoration, it's strategic. Darker felt absorbs more sun. Perfect for warming a cold home in winter. To waterproof the roof, they've added an extra dose of lanolin, collected from earlier washings, thickened over low heat, and brushed onto the top layer with a bundle of stiff grass. It smells intense. Like a mix between a wet sweater and beef stew. You remind yourself, this is the smell of insulation. As rain begins to tap gently on the roof, you crouch inside with the family, watching how the drops bead and roll off the surface. The inside stays dry. Remarkably so. Someone pours a little extra water near the seam to test it. Nothing leaks. The grandmother grins, nods, and mumbles something about good spirits liking dry beds. Another fringe tradition. In some regions, they would bury a small felt square beneath the threshold during roof construction, drenched in milk and rainwater, to ask for balance between elements. Fire above. Water below. Wool in between. You glance around. Everything here is about balance. In fact, even the placement of the felt on the roof follows a set choreography. The main cover is rolled on from back to front, symbolically pushing out darkness and welcoming light. The sides are anchored with heavy ropes and stones, pulled tight against the ribs of the roof ring, tonneau. These ropes, too, are often covered in felt sleeves, insulating the lines, protecting the knots. But the most fascinating part? The breath zone. At the top of every gur, there's an intentional gap in the felt, a narrow slit left at the smoke hole. Not just to let fire breath escape, but to allow moisture to rise, air to flow. A fully sealed felt house would be warm and suffocating. It's like a woolen lump. Inhale. Exhale. Historians still argue whether this breathing design was a direct imitation of natural airflow patterns observed in caves and cliffs, or if it emerged from spiritual beliefs about needing a passage between the hearth and the heavens. Either way, it works. You can feel the draft at your feet and the warmth staying wrapped around your chest. The house breathes. You breathe. Back outside, a group of teenagers are laying down an emergency repair felt, a secondary cover stored in case of heavy rain or roof damage. It's older, patched, and a little frayed, but still serviceable. They tie it down quickly, eyes on the clouds. Storms here move fast. You wonder how many times this same sheet has been pulled into action, how many storms it's seen. One girl tells you it's called the Cloud Fighter. Another says it used to be part of her grandmother's wedding GR. They both agree that it probably repels hail. You decide not to ask how. The rain passes quickly, as it does on the steppe, and within an hour the sun returns, shy then bright. Steam rises from the felt like ghosts lifting away. You press your hand to the roof and feel the heat gathering again. Drying. Strengthening. Wool remembers. And just for fun, you step over to a goat tied under a tree and ask it, quietly, if it had anything to do with last week's leaky door flap. It stares back at you, unimpressed. Probably guilty. You're up to your elbows in what smells distinctly like bark tea and yesterday's boots. Today, you're dyeing wool the traditional way, which means no synthetic colors, no neat little bottles, and definitely no gloves. Welcome to the messy magic of Mongolian felt dyes, earthy, gritty, and for reasons no one wants to fully explain, occasionally pea-based. The work begins long before the wool hits water. You're seated beside a squat iron pot suspended over an outdoor fire, where dried leaves, roots, and bits of something you really hope is just onion skin simmer into a dark, bubbling soup. The dye master, an older woman with arms like braided rope and a grin like she knows something she's not telling, leans over and gives the pot a stir. This one's for red, she says. Bloodroot. And maybe beet. She doesn't elaborate on the maybe. The wool itself, already carded and cleaned, is being pre-soaked in another container. You notice the liquid is faintly yellow and smells sharp. She sees you wrinkling your nose and laughs. Yes, she says. Urine. Old woman's is best. You blink. Before you can ask follow-up questions you're not sure you want the answers to, she shrugs and adds, it helps the color bind. Like vinegar, but free. Then she hands you a bundle of fleece and tells you to stir it clockwise. Only clockwise. Apparently, counterclockwise dyeing results in tangled dreams. Or maybe tangled wool. Either way, not ideal. Historians still argue whether the use of urine in dyeing was born out of chemical necessity or practical superstition. Or maybe both. Either way, it works. The ammonia helps fix the natural pigments from roots, bark, berries, and flowers onto the wool, creating earthy, rich colors that, while not flashy, last surprisingly well. You sit back on your heels, watching the color change. Slowly, the pale fleece takes on a murky warmth, shifting from cream to rust red. Not instant. Not clean. But real. Honest. Felt doesn't do neon. It does soil and sky, fire and bone. The palette of survival. A fringe detail. In some mountain regions, they used crushed lichen to get a dusky violet shade, and the best lichen was said to grow only where wolves had urinated. You choose not to think too hard about how that discovery was made. Once the wool is dyed, it's wrung out, stretched, and left to dry on a rack made of curved willow branches. The wind lifts the fibers as they dry, leaving them stiff and whispering like sunburnt grass. You run your hands along a blue-gray piece, dyed with mountain ash and rainwater, and feel the difference. Cooler, drier, almost brittle. This color, they say, is for wisdom. Inside the gur, you help arrange the newly dyed wool for a decorative felt panel. Unlike the structural felts used in roofs or floors, these are made for beauty. Or, at the very least, expression. Women gather in a semicircle, each taking a color, red, green, yellow, blue, and forming patterns on a thick white base mat. There's no stencil. No sketch. Just muscle memory and instinct. Spirals of flame. Cross goat horns. interlocking rhombuses that represent the endless knot of life. You ask one woman what her pattern means. She shrugs. It's my mother's. I dreamt it last night. Once the pattern is laid out, it's misted with warm water, covered with a cloth, and pressed down hard with rolling pins and feet. Unlike Western felt art, which often emphasizes crisp edges and neat contrasts, Mongolian felt decoration lets colors bleed slightly, melding like shadows, hinting rather than shouting. Historians still argue whether this soft border style developed due to technique or cultural aesthetics. Was it an accident of moisture and pressure, or a deliberate preference for symbolic over literal expression? Either way, it fits the worldview. In the steppe, nothing stays still. Everything merges, moves, breathes. As the panel takes shape, you notice something odd. No black. You ask about it, and one woman gestures to the fire. Black is already here, she says. No need to add it. Color isn't just design here. It's language. Red is fire, birth, and blood. Yellow is the steppe in late summer. Green, of course, is life. And blue, eternal blue, is everything. The sky, the soul, the endless watching presence above. That's why blue is almost never walked on. Floor felts might be brown, gray, or even red. But blue? Reserved for wall hangings, cradles, sometimes clothing. It's a color for carrying, not for crushing. There's even a belief that wearing blue wool on a long journey helps you return safely. You tuck that bit away, just in case. You help move the finished panel to dry in the sun, and watch the colors deepen slightly as the wool tightens. It'll fade over time, but not vanish. You run your fingers along the design again and feel the soft ridges where red meets green, where color pushes against color then melts. One last quirk. Some families bury scraps of dyed wool near newly planted trees. They say it helps the roots remember what season they were born in. You wonder if there's any science behind it. Then again, maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe it's just another way of stitching human intention into the world. You sit beside the drying felts now, hands stained rust and yellow, and close your eyes. The wind smells of fire and bark and sheep. The panel flaps gently on its rack, like a slow flag. And somewhere nearby, you hear someone mutter, "Good color." It won't lie. You don't know what that means. Not exactly. But it sounds true. You're deep in the earth now, well, not you exactly. More like your imagination, digging carefully through cold soil, past centuries of frost and time. The light is dim, the air still and musty, and before you lies something that shouldn't have survived. But it has. A piece of felt. Ancient, intact, breathing history through every matted fiber. Welcome to the Pazyryk burial mounds. This is where the steppe keeps its secrets. These burial kurgans, giant, stone-lined pits built by nomadic Scythian and Proto-Mongol cultures in the Altai Mountains, have offered up some of the world's oldest known felt. Not tiny fragments. Full pieces. Saddlecloths. Wall hangings. Horse armor. Even a pair of boots. Still patterned. Still functional. Still whispering stories. You gently unroll a protective cloth in your mind and see it. A felt applique in red, gold, and charcoal, the image of a griffin-like creature coiled into itself. Its eye, stitched in black thread, stares directly into yours. It's both myth and textile. Decoration and devotion. Historians still argue whether these burial felts were purely ornamental or had deeper ceremonial meanings. Were they made for display, or were they offerings? Or perhaps, in nomadic belief, the dead needed homes too, soft-walled, warm, and circular, just like the living. In one burial chamber, frozen almost perfectly for over 2,000 years, you see a felt saddle cover laid beneath the body of a warrior. The felt isn't plain. It's stitched with winged deer and spirals that look eerily modern. You imagine the warrior traveling into the afterlife, riding across dream steppes under a sky of felt stars. And that's the thing, felt doesn't just survive here. It resists. In these dry, icy tombs, where leather cracks and wood decays, felt endures. It absorbs moisture, regulates temperature, and once frozen, hardens into time capsules. In some places, it's preserved so perfectly that archaeologists had to remind themselves not to breathe too hard near it. A quirky find: one burial mound contained a felt-wrapped lump of cheese, now fossilized into a sort of prehistoric snack bar. No one's eaten it, thankfully. Yet. But it suggests that felt wasn't just about clothing or shelter, it was a packaging material. The Tupperware of the ancient world. You crawl back into the modern world, blinking in the sun, and realize something else. Even though you're miles from those ancient tombs, the techniques used to make that burial felt aren't so different from what you've seen in the jars. The layering. The compression. The soft decoration. Time may have shifted the tools slightly, but not the touch. When modern fellbakers roll their wool, they're rolling in steps already taken millennia ago. Back in the present, a local felt artisan shows you a reproduction of one of the ancient Pazyryk patterns. It's not a perfect copy. He insists no two felt pieces should ever be truly alike, but it echoes the spirals and leaping animals in a way that makes your skin prickle. Felt remembers, he says, echoing something you've now heard from 3 different regions. You press your palm to the mat. It's warm from the sun. Soft at first, then firm underneath. You close your eyes and imagine lying in one of those ancient tombs, not with fear, but with peace. Encircled by wool. Protected by pattern. Sleeping in a home that doesn't rot, even under ice. There's even a theory that felt played a symbolic role in rebirth. That its resilience, how it refuses to break apart, how it merges and binds, was seen as a metaphor for the eternal cycle. Life into death, death into memory, memory into wool. Like reincarnation, but fluffier. Historians still argue whether these metaphors were explicitly religious or simply intuitive. After all, when you live with a material so closely, when it wraps you at birth, carries you through life, and follows you to the grave, it's hard not to see it as more than just fiber. You move now through a small museum tucked into a rural village. Most of the items here are recent, made in the last 50 years. But one corner is devoted to the old style, modeled on Pazyryk finds. There's a felt tunic, short, wide-sleeved, with borders of red on white. There's a pouch, heavily stitched and beaded. And then, curiously, there's a felt map. Or at least, it looks like one. The curator explains. This might not be a literal map, but it shows rivers, paths, campsites. We think it was used to tell stories. Maybe even to teach. You nod. A tactile scroll. A woolen archive. A fringe fact: some nomadic elders used to keep memory felts, strips of wool embroidered not for display, but as quiet personal diaries. Not written in letters, but symbols. A star for a birth. A spiral for a journey. A jagged line for a winter storm. These weren't shown to outsiders. Some were even buried with the person. Just them and their story, stitched in silence. And it's not just humans who got the felt treatment. Archaeological digs have uncovered horses dressed in full felt barding, blankets, masks, chest guards. Not decorative. Functional. Horses were companions, transportation, prestige. They got armor, shelter, warmth. Just like people. You think back to the felt walls of the gur, to the child's bedroll, the mother's stitched wall hanging, the grandmother's dyed wool. And now, here, in the deep freeze of time, you see the same craft holding the same shape. The air is cooler now. Evening's coming. You sit on a felt mat patterned with copies of those Pazyryk beasts, griffins, stags, rams in mid-leap. They stare upward, frozen mid-motion. Or maybe just waiting. And as you close your eyes, the earth feels softer beneath you. Like something once buried, but still breathing. The wind's howling again, but this time it's not outside, it's in your ears. You're wearing a shaman's coat. Or at least, a reproduction of one. The wool scrapes your neck, heavy with talismans, metal rings, stitched charms, and something that might be a mummified bird claw. You're standing in a circle of flickering firelight, smoke stinging your eyes, heartbeats slow but deliberate. Welcome to the strange intersection where wool meets the spirit world, and war. The felt around your shoulders is thick, double-layered, and dyed a deep indigo. Not for looks. For protection. Mongolian shamans, boos as they're called, have long used felt in their ritual clothing. Not because it's soft. Because it's alive. Or at least, it holds things. Energy. Memory. Intention. You've been told by someone who won't tell you their name that every ring on this coat's sleeve is meant to echo the bones of an ancestor. The sound they make when the wearer dances is not random. It's a summons. Shamans used felt in many forms. In hats, tall, conical, stitched with zigzag patterns to mimic lightning. In masks, hidden faces to fool wandering spirits. In boots, so that when they crossed into the other world, they wouldn't disturb the soil. And most famously in cloaks. Thick, heavy, almost suffocating, they're lined with charms, bells, bones, feathers, and stones. Each item sewn in with a specific intent. A name. A need. Historians still argue whether these garments were purely ceremonial or if they had practical roots in cold weather survival. But no one disputes the felt's role, insulation not just against temperature, but against the unseen. And it wasn't just the shamans. Felt played a role in battle, too. Mongol warriors didn't just rely on metal. In fact, many didn't have it. What they had was wool. Felt armor might sound like a contradiction, soft fabric meant for war. But once you feel its heft, its density, it makes a certain wild sense. Layered correctly, usually in 3 or more compressed sheets, sometimes soaked in glue or even animal blood to harden, it could absorb the impact of arrows, even blunt weapons. More importantly, it stayed warm, didn't freeze, and didn't clatter. You could move silently, strike quickly, sleep in it, and then, with a little drying and care, wear it again the next day. You crouch now in a felt-lined tent used by military scouts. It's smaller than a family gur, low to the ground, padded on the inside with old felts dyed a dull olive brown. There are no decorations. Just insulation. The scout explains that during Genghis Khan's campaigns, entire mobile units operated this way: camouflaged jares, felt armor, wool-lined quivers. Quiet domination. And if you think the wool armor thing is a stretch, chew on this. Felt helmets were a real item. Shaped like cones, often wrapped in leather or fur, they protected the skull while offering breathability and warmth. Better than nothing. And a lot lighter than a steel dome. There's even a quirky theory, still debated in academic circles, that some elite horse archers used felt-wrapped bows to reduce the twang sound after firing. Whether it worked is unclear, but it's just weird enough to be true. You ask one old storyteller in the Orkhon Valley about this idea, and he laughs. "We wrapped everything in felt," he says. "Bow, saddle, spoon, baby. Why not?" But perhaps the most fascinating application of felt in combat wasn't physical at all. It was symbolic. Before battle, certain warriors would perform a felt circle ritual. A mat would be unrolled in the center of camp, and chosen fighters would walk around it 3 times, always clockwise, before stepping onto it and offering a vow. That felt circle became sacred for the duration of the campaign. If a warrior betrayed the vow, it was said the felt would curse their saddle, and their horse would throw them. Often fatally. One time, you see a reproduction of such a mat. It's not flashy. Just gray felt, stitched with red thread into concentric circles. But standing on it, you feel something tighten in your chest. Whether that's spiritual power or just awe is up for debate. And then there's the battlefield messaging. Mongol commanders reportedly used strips of colored felt as signals: red for attack, black for retreat, yellow for regroup. Flags, yes, but also sashes tied to spears, visible even in dust storms. Cheap, durable, easily replaced. You don't need silk when you've got wool. A fringe tidbit: some captured soldiers of the Mongols, once released, wrote accounts of being blindfolded with thick felt while being moved between camps, supposedly to disorient them. Turns out it worked. "I remember only darkness, heat, and the stink of horse sweat," one traveler wrote. Effective. Terrifying. Biodegradable. As evening sets in, a group of reenactors puts on a performance. They wear felt helmets and felt chest wraps, carrying replica bows and shields made partly from wool-wrapped bark. It's not a perfect simulation, but it makes something clear: felt isn't weak. Not in the hands of people who know it. Later you sit with a shaman trainee, a teenager, awkward but bright-eyed, who shows you their ritual felt belt. It's plain for now. No bells, no bones. But already, the fibers are stiffening from use. Sweat. Time. Prayers. You'll add charms when you're ready? You ask. They nod. And when the felt asks, that answer stays with you. You lie down again on a mat that once served under a warrior's saddle. It's rough, stained in places, patched in others. But it holds. Still. And under the fading light, it feels less like fabric, more like armor softened by memory. You open your eyes to something strange: flat concrete, straight lines, and the unmistakable smell of something slightly too sterile. This isn't a GR. This is a factory. A Soviet-era felt factory, to be exact. Welcome to the 20th century, comrade, where even ancient crafts get measured in quotas and stamped with approval codes. The walls are painted that particular shade of industrial green that somehow makes you feel both alert and slightly unwell. Long metal tables line the room. Wool, once carded lovingly by hand and sung into softness, now comes in on conveyor belts. And yet, there's still the smell of sheep. You're still surrounded by wool. In the 1930s and 40s, as Soviet influence rolled across Mongolia like a gray snowstorm, traditional felting didn't vanish, it just changed hats. Collectivization hit the steppe hard, and crafts that had always been communal and spiritual were suddenly repurposed as economic engines. Jars were standardized. Livestock was counted. And felt became a production target. You walk past a line of workers, mostly women, pressing dyed wool into sheets using heavy rolling machines. The rhythm is mechanical, but their hands still move with the old memory. One glances up and smiles. Still made the same way, she says. Just louder. The factory system brought benefits. More insulation products, more medical felts, even military-grade lining for boots and winter coats. Soviet soldiers wore Mongolian wool on the Eastern Front. Not a bad endorsement, when you think about it. But something's missing. The sacred songs. The milk-blessing rituals. The goat-blaming humor. You can't smell juniper smoke. You can't feel the wool hum. Historians still argue whether Soviet industrialization preserved Mongolian felt-making by giving it infrastructure, or if it diluted the tradition by removing its spiritual spine. Both sides have a point. Production increased. Styles simplified. But some families kept the old ways alive in secret, felting quietly in jars by candlelight, singing under their breath, hiding ancestral patterns and linings no one would see. One elderly woman at the back of the room shows you her glove. Just a glove. But inside the wrist, where no one can see, she's stitched a spiral. For protection, she says. The machine doesn't care. But I do. You nod, silently in awe. A fringe story circulates about an engineer in Ulaanbaatar who tried to introduce synthetic fibers into the felt line in the 70s. The result? Cracked felts, itchy workers, and one machine that shorted out 3 days in a row. They brought in a local shaman to clear the energy. And allegedly, everything worked fine after that. Totally not scientific. Completely believed. You move next into a storage room where bolts of felt, stamped and bundled, are stacked like oversized books. This is where export happens, rolls sent to Poland, Russia, China. Mostly for construction insulation or industrial padding. Functional, forgettable. But in a dim corner, under a loose tarp, you find something else. Traditional felt mats. With dyed edges. And motifs. They weren't made for shipping, they were made by someone who remembered. Someone who couldn't help themselves. And just like that, you're back in a world of quiet rebellion. You follow this thread, pun intended, to a woman in her 60s who worked the factory floor for decades. She invites you to her apartment, where every surface is covered in felt, rugs, wall hangings, tea cozies. Even her radio has a tiny wool hat. You admire a cushion with an 8-pointed star in mustard and black. She nods. My mother's pattern, she says. They said we had to make things square. But stars don't like squares. She shows you old photographs. Workers outside the factory on break, sitting cross-legged on hand-felted mats. One man holds a balalaika. Another's got a flask. She smiles and says, "They told us to forget. We didn't." There's a certain poetry in this industrial era of felt. The machines tried to flatten it, uniform it. But the wool refused. Even processed felt had lumps, inconsistencies, quirks. Some workers snuck strands of blue wool into otherwise gray rolls. Others stitched initials into inner layers. One family supposedly created an entire code, family history told in felt placement, pattern shape, and thread count. Historians still argue whether this post-Soviet period marked a decline or a transformation. Was felt lost in the tide of plastic, concrete, and polyester? Or did it simply cocoon, waiting to re-emerge? You know the answer. You've been watching it re-emerge all along. As the 1990s approached, and Mongolia shifted politically and economically, felt began to find its own feet again. Family workshops reopened. Grandmothers began teaching granddaughters in full daylight, not just at night. Craft fairs became common. Tourists started buying hand-felted slippers. The songs got louder. You visit one such family in the countryside near Erdenet. Their felt production blends both worlds, electric carders and hoof-powered rollers. Digital pattern references and gut-level intuition. A teenage girl scrolls on her phone with one hand while laying wool with the other. Pinterest idea, she says, showing you a pattern of overlapping waves. But I changed it. Made it ours. And there it is again, that soft defiance. The soul of felt, refusing to be factory press flat. You leave the city, finally, with a strip of hand-stitched felt tucked in your bag. It's small, maybe 20 centimeters long. Gray with a single red line curling into a spiral. You don't know what it means. The woman who gave it to you just smiled and said, "It's for remembering." You run your thumb along the curve of the spiral. It holds. You're standing in the thick of it now, color, sound, movement, and everything smells unmistakably like sheep. Welcome to Naadam, Mongolia's biggest festival, where wrestling, archery, and horse racing take center stage, but felt is everywhere, quietly holding the whole thing together. You duck into a tent, more of a marquee, really, and your feet land on a soft, springy mat. Not just any mat. A wrestling mat, handmade and hand-felted, built thick to absorb the force of generations of boys slamming into the earth. It's a muted red, stitched with swirling patterns in green and black. This is where dreams are made and tailbones are bruised. And yes, it still smells faintly of lanolin and boiled milk. In the center, two men, bare-chested and wearing only snug briefs and traditional shoulder-flapped vests, circle each other. The crowd leans in. Then, with a blur of motion and a slap of flesh on felt, one goes down. The mat softens the fall but not the pride. Wrestling, Bok, is one of the 3 manly skills celebrated during Naadam. And while the glory goes to the grapplers, the stage belongs to the felt beneath their feet. You wander further, dodging skewers of grilled meat and small children in warrior hats, and spot felt saddle blankets drying under the sun. Racing horses, their sides heaving from a 5-kilometer sprint, have already shed their felts, now draped across fences like woolen flags. You run your hand across one and feel the weight, dense, flat, sweat-dampened. It's not pretty, but it works. These horses galloped across history on felted backs. Historians still argue whether Naadam's origins were purely ceremonial, offered to the sky gods, or practical, evolving from military training camps. But either way, felt has always been part of it. Quietly. Functionally. Everywhere. A fringe tidbit, some families bring their own home felted cushions to sit on during Naadam, not because the benches are uncomfortable, though they are, but because sitting on someone else's felt is thought to bring bad luck. The cushion is like a wool passport. Your own little patch of territory. You step into a booth selling souvenirs and crafts. Felt slippers, felt dolls, felt laptop sleeves. A woman proudly points to a deal, traditional coat, with felt trim she made herself. Old method, she says, thumping her chest. My grandmother's grandmother. Then she offers you a small felted ball. Scented, she adds. You sniff. Lavender? Maybe. With an undertone of yak. Nearby, an elder craftsman demonstrates the rolling technique to a circle of fascinated onlookers. His felt is dyed sky blue, pressed into a circle that's supposed to resemble a sun. He tells the crowd, in a voice hoarse from decades of cold winds, that this pattern is a wish. Sun on your back. Always, he says. Someone applauds. Someone else wipes a tear. The festival is loud. But the felt? It's quiet. Holding underfoot. Warming in shadows. Catching the spill of arag, fermented mare's milk, from a dropped cup without complaint. You sit for a moment on the edge of a wrestling ring and realize the felt beneath you isn't just padding. It's continuity. That same wool, that same process, has cushioned the fall of warriors for centuries. You think back to a story you heard in a village, about a famous wrestler who refused to compete unless he could bring his own mat, felted by his mother. It wasn't superstition. It was comfort. Familiar pressure. A reminder of where he came from. You visit a children's game tent and find another surprise. Felt balls, soft and slightly squishy, used in traditional toss games. One girl, no older than 7, hands you hers and says, "Smell." You do. It's minty. My mom hides herbs in it, she explains. So I play good. You resist the urge to pocket it. At the archery range, felt creeps in again. The arm guards some archers were aligned with it. Lightweight, flexible, and soft enough to protect without restricting. One archer even has felt pads stitched into his boots. For balance, he tells you. And because it squeaks less on dry grass. And then, finally, the music tent. Inside, singers prepare for their performance. Urshandu, long song, stretching syllables across time. Behind them, the walls are covered in decorative felts. Some are ancient. Others clearly made for tourists. But all shimmer in the tent's soft light. The sound seems to bounce off them differently, rounder, fuller. You wonder if the felt itself helps carry the voice. Or maybe it just listens better than most people. Historians still argue whether Nadam's felt traditions are rooted in necessity or ceremony. But you've stopped drawing that line. Here, utility and beauty ride in the same saddlebag. The sun begins to set over the festival grounds. Kids fall asleep on rolled-up felts. Horses munch hay beside wool-covered fences. Somewhere, a wrestling champion sings a drinking song while lying on his back, arms stretched wide, letting the earth and the felt hold his weight. He doesn't care about the dust. That's what felt is for. And you're lying back now too, using your coat as a pillow, your feet half off the edge of a handmade mat. It itches a little. Smells a bit like goat. But it holds the moment perfectly. In the sky, the first stars blink into place. The festival smells like sheep. And it smells like home. You're scrolling now, yep, you, phone in hand, warm beverage nearby, wrapped in a suspiciously cozy wool blanket that may or may not be felt. Your screen is filled with soft textures, intricate patterns, and the occasional hashtag like hashtag nomadic vibes or hashtag feltcore. Welcome to the modern world of Mongolian felt making, where centuries-old tradition collides with Wi-Fi, selfies, and side hustles. Your thumb pauses on a short video, a grandmother in central Mongolia, eyes sharp as hawks, laying out carded wool on her gur floor. Her granddaughter records, adding captions in both Cyrillic and English. Making felt just like she taught my mom. Ram yellow heart dot. The view count? Over 2 million. Felt, it seems, has gone viral. But it's more than cute videos and rustic aesthetics. This is preservation in real time. You keep scrolling. Another post shows a felt-making workshop in Ulaanbaatar, part of a community program where elders teach kids how to card, lay, and roll felt. Behind them, a printed sign that says "Our wool, our way." You double tap. Historians still argue whether digitizing traditional crafts diminishes their authenticity or helps ensure their survival. But based on your feed, it's hard to argue with the enthusiasm. Felt is trending. Again. There's even an Etsy shop run by three sisters from over Shanghai. They sell hand-felted slippers shaped like little jars, with doors that actually open. For dreams to come and go, the description reads. Each one is made with wool from their own herd, dyed with local herbs, and felted underfoot, literally stomped by hand during songs. A fringe product? Felt phone cases with embroidered Mongolian proverbs. One says, even a cold wind can be softened with wool. You wonder how that translates into tech culture, but it still feels right. You switch apps. On TikTok, a felter in Shanghai explains how to spot the difference between machine-pressed and hand-rolled felt. Your felt should talk back, she says. If it's silent, it's dead. Her eyes twinkle. The comment section is a mix of awe, emojis, and a few suspicious wool enthusiasts from Finland chiming in. What's remarkable is how this tradition is adapting without losing its center. The form evolves, digital patterns, online sales, translated tutorials, but the method, the rhythm, remains. Wool, water, pressure, patience. No matter the filter. You watch a live stream of a workshop run by a cooperative of herding families. They ship their felt worldwide now, thanks to a fiber arts boom in Europe and North America. But they still start each session with a cup of salty tea and a whispered blessing. The felt, they insist, must know where it's going. And it's going everywhere. Urban artists in Ulaanbaatar are making wall installations from dyed felts. A young fashion designer featured in Mongol TV's Next Wave show has a line of felted jackets inspired by burial mound motifs. The colors are muted, but the silhouettes are bold, shoulders like mountain peaks, sleeves that swirl like river eddies. You message one of them on Instagram. They reply 2 hours later. Felt is our canvas. But it's also our armor. You scroll past the digital zine published by a university in Tokyo featuring young Mongolian felters and their grandmothers. Each pair shares a photo and a story. One teenager writes, "My grandma doesn't trust Google Maps, but she can find the best wool by smell alone." You laugh. Then save it. And still, even as felt enters the online world, it resists becoming plastic. There's a stubborn tactility about it. One influencer jokes that felt is the anti-app. It won't rush. You can't speed up the felting process with an algorithm. Wool takes time. That's the deal. In a quiet moment, you revisit an older post, grainy video, low volume. An elderly woman in a felt-covered gear sings while rolling a wool mat. No hashtags. No commentary. Just song and wool and sky peeking through the smoke hole. That, you realize, is what they're all trying to keep. That exact moment. Of course, not everything in this modern feltscape is warm fuzzies. There are debates over cultural appropriation. Concerns about fast fashion brands trying to mimic felt aesthetics with synthetic knockoffs. Some felt makers refuse to sell online at all, arguing that the work should remain rooted, personal, tied to the land that grew the wool. Historians still argue whether tradition must freeze to survive, or if it can flow like a river, changing form but never essence. But here, in this scrollable world of stitches and stories, the river is definitely moving. You close your phone for a minute and look around your own space. Maybe you're on a couch. Maybe your blanket has a label. But still, you run your fingers over it and think about all the hands, hooves, and heartbeats that once worked wool into warmth. You brew a cup of tea. Not salty. Not smoky. But warm enough. You sit back, surrounded by hums, appliances, notifications, your own slow breath, and you picture a felt mat drying in the sun, patterned with a dream someone never posted. And just for a second, the world feels stitched together. The mat beneath you is old. Not museum old, not stitched with gold old. Just worn. Trusted. You're back in the countryside, crouched beside a master felter who looks like she could scold the wind into behaving. Her hands rest on her knees, fingers permanently curled from decades of rolling, lifting, threading, pressing. Beside her, the felt mat lies like a second skin, patched in 7 places, a little sun-bleached, corners softened to the shape of memory. She invites you to sit. You do, and the felt gives, then holds. This one's from my wedding, she says. That square? My mother added that when the twins were born. Over there? Firehole burn. Winter of '94. We kept a fire going for 3 weeks, never let it go out. You trace the edges of that firehole, dark, stiffened. Still holding. She doesn't say much after that. Doesn't need to. You just sit with her as the breeze plays with the smoke above, as goats mutter somewhere near the fence, as the felt quietly supports your spine and her stories. This isn't display felt. Not the kind sold in shops or posted online. It's personal. It remembers. There's something to that idea, something that lingers long after the story's end. That felt isn't just made. It's grown. Like a family. Like a habit. It starts rough and unpredictable, full of loose ends and tangles. But with time, pressure, and care it tightens. It holds shape. It survives. Historians still argue whether the transmission of felt-making knowledge should be considered oral tradition, textile history, or spiritual lineage. The answer, of course, is yes. All of it. You notice something else about this mat. Not all the patches match. Some are lighter, some darker. One's patterned. That one, she says, came from my sister's old GR. We stitched our pieces together the year she passed. There's no ceremony around this. No grand explanation. Just 2 lives sewn back into one surface. You ask her if she still makes felt. She smiles, shakes her head. Now I just repair it. That's enough. Outside the gur, children chase each other with wool scraps. A boy has tied one around his head like a crown. A girl's trying to wrap her arm like a bandage. They're inventing new uses, new rules, new games. The felt plays along. And you realize something. The story of felt was never linear. It never marched through time like a soldier. It drifted, rolled, scattered, was picked up and laid down again, folded into new lives, new meanings. The master felt her eyes close as she leans back. You do the same. The sun shifts. The air slows. The felt warms beneath you, not because it's heated, but because it remembers how. And then, as you settle, you realize, you're not lying on a mat. You're lying on a story. On hundreds of them. Each fiber twisted from someone's hand, each patch stitched in response to something. Birth, break, rebuild. This mat has seen everything. And it's still soft. The goats bleat louder now. Time to head inside. You stand, brushing dust from your knees. The master felt her stay seated, eyes half open. Take a square, she says suddenly. You blink. What? A square of this. Take it. You hesitate. I shouldn't. It's already part of you, she says. She hands you a small square, cut from a worn corner. Gray, faded red stitch along the edge. Soft but stubborn. You press it between your palms. It holds. The sky is dim now, blues slipping quietly into velvet, the last warmth of the day folded away. The fire inside the gur has gone low, just embers now, pulsing softly like the slow breath of a sleeping house. The felt beneath you doesn't speak, but it doesn't need to. It remembers. Outside, the steppe exhales. Horses nicker. A dog rustles against the side of the tent, then settles. And far, far off, a single bell tinks on a sheep's collar, swaying in rhythm with the hush. You lie back, one hand resting on the felt, feeling its weight, its softness, its strange quiet strength. This fabric has crossed centuries. It's been pressed under hooves, dragged behind ponies, stitched with laughter and silence alike. It's been armor and artwork, floor and ceiling, a cradle and a grave. And now it's a pillow. A soft, handmade bridge between old dreams and new ones. So you breathe. Slowly. Feel the mat beneath you, the weight of stories it carries. Let it hold you too. In this moment, the world is round. Soft. Layered. Just like the felt. And it cradles you, exactly as it has cradled generations before. You're not floating. You're not falling. You're held. You're home.